This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
Now, I'm guessing you're pretty surprised. It's been a long time since the last podcast, and I'm guessing you thought that the podcast had gone offline permanently. Well, we're back. The reason I've been offline for so long is I took over a new role as a CEO for a research and development lab. Needless to say, I've been heads down retooling this organization. The focus that I've had since the last podcast is really building a culture of innovation based on a set of core attributes, which ties in perfectly to the last podcast and this podcast. So rather than talk about theoreticals, I'm going to give you a look behind the curtain of what I've been doing for the last year. Now, last June 1 of 2012, it was announced that I was taking over this new role. Now, if you're interested in the background, feel free to go to the blog site and take a look. But coming in June 1, what I did was I set out a 100-day plan, looking at the current organization and truly trying to understand what makes it tick. So I spent a significant amount of time, roughly the first 45 days or so, doing one-on-one interviews with all the key stakeholders. That's meant the senior staff within the organization, key participants outside, and industry experts. And I basically asked them 4 questions. And this is the questions that I asked as part of my learning process. So the first question I asked was, what should we preserve? What is it we do good that we should just keep on doing? Second question, what should we stop doing? What is it that we do that just totally annoys you or actually gets in the way or is detrimental to success? And what is it we should stop? Third question is, hey, I'm the new guy. What is it that you most hope I do? What is that thing that you would hope the new guy would come in and change? The fourth question is, hey, I'm the new guy. What do you hope I not do? What is your one fear that I won't do coming in as the new guy? Now, what's interesting about that last question is that when I talk to all of the employees within this organization, 95% of the employees gave me the exact same answer. And that is their biggest fear is that the new CEO would come in and not change anything. That it would just keep the status quo. The employees don't have their head stuck in the sand. They got the fact that for the organization to be successful going forward, things fundamentally had to change. And they were hoping that whoever came in as the new CEO, that they would not be afraid to upset the apple cart and really take a look at the entire organization top to bottom. Now, based on this charter of change, which I felt I got both from the employee base but also the board of directors, first thing I wanted to do was really understand what made up the core attributes. What makes the organization the organization? Now, what I found was a little surprising. Now, you could argue that there are some core attributes, that there are certain policies and procedures. But in my assessment is that the core attributes were either inherently done by accident or worse, non-existent. Now, this actually created a great opportunity because I could build the core attributes up from scratch. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, the key there is you got to help everyone understand why core attributes are so important. Now, there's a previous podcast, and there's also a blog post on this that is from last year that you can go out and check, and I'll link to it in the show notes. The first thing out of the gate was collect up a list of words that either describe what the organization is, or in this case, more importantly, what is it the team wants the organization to become? When there's no core attributes that exist, this is an excellent opportunity to participate in the process of defining an organization that you want to work with, that you want to be a part of, that you want to contribute to. So we collected up all these words. Now, keep in mind, core attributes articulate what you stand for. They explain why you do business the way you do. When all else fails, organizations need to be able to fall back on a set of core attributes that drive everything from decision-making to priorities to how teams interact with each other and how we get viewed outside in the marketplace. So, what were the core attributes that we came up with as part of this new organization? Well, I'm going to run through the list here relatively quickly just to give you a feel, but these are not what I would call core attributes that apply to every organization. Core attributes need to be personal. They need to mean something to your organization. So, the core attributes that we came up with include, we are passionate. We need to have passion. As I've said in the past, if you're going to play in the innovation game, what I hire for is passion. I can teach technical skills. I can teach how to be more innovative. I can teach an innovation funnel process. What I cannot teach is I can't teach passion. Core, fundamental, people in the organization, the entire organization needs to be passionate about what it is they do. Second, we think big and bold. We are an R&D organization. We get funded by outside corporations that are in the industry to develop and invent what's going to be the next big product or service. We get paid to think big and bold. This attribute I put in place specifically to challenge the organization to get out of the rut of kind of the incremental next innovation that inherently describes any industry. We need to think big and bold. Third, we are fast and agile. When I went back and I looked through all my notes on the 4 questions that I asked all the stakeholders, one of the key complaints about the organization was it was slow and it was fixed. Not a lot of flexibility to do new and different things or to do it a different way. So this is a core attribute to challenge this process or this perception of the organization from the stakeholders. We need to be fast and agile. Fourth is, we are a team. We're small. We're not that large of an organization. The only way to success is not about individuals, but about team. Next is, we classified an attribute around what we call unlocking individual potential. How do we enable people within the organization to achieve way beyond what they even think they can do themselves? How do we challenge individuals? How do we put together development programs? How do we create an environment where people go far beyond contributing to the success of the organization, far beyond anything they would have thought they could do? The next one, we lead by example. When I went back again and looked at my notes from the 4 questions I asked all the stakeholders, one of the key attributes of this organization was its honesty and integrity. I got constant praise and constant accolades about the honesty and integrity of the organization down to each individual within the organization. And we defined this as really being the anchor, the cornerstone, the key to our organization. And in this case, we say that we lead by example. We're going to set the bar on how we interact with each other, how do we interact with people in the industry, and how we interact with people outside the industry. We lead by example, and core to that is our honesty and integrity. And last, we are resourceful. We are a small organization, so it's key for us to deliver ideas and innovations in R&D far beyond our size and scale. So we have to be resourceful in how we do that. So again, we are passionate, we think big and bold, we are fast and agile, we are a team, we unlock individual potential, we lead by example, and we are resourceful. Now, once you've captured this, and believe me, this took months to pull this together, and people had different wordings, and I actually stayed out of it. I did not inject myself into putting together the list. In fact, I only contributed my input after the list was about 80-85% done, because I didn't want to have undue influence into the final list that was created. Now, once you have that list, now you're ready to start the process. Having the list is not the end, it's the beginning of the process. Now, what is the process? How do you move from having this list to really integrating it inside the organization? First things first, the senior executives must own this. This is not an HR process. This is not a personnel development team process. This must be always controlled and owned by the senior executives. The senior executives have to sign up to live these core attributes. They're on stage each and every day in front of the employees and staffs and our outside stakeholders. People have to be able to see them living these core attributes each and every day. Now, if you can't live up to those core attributes, then change the core attributes. Or if you not want to do that, then maybe those executives should no longer be part of the organization. The key here is the senior executives must own this. Then everybody in the organization needs to understand that these attributes are core and essential. And it now becomes the bar that we will hold ourselves to. We will hold ourselves to interacting with each other, interacting with our stakeholders, and interacting outside of our industry and our organization. And we need to manage the process to get everybody on board. It's communicating the core attributes, communicating the importance, and then working a process to get everybody in the boat. So what did we do? How did we actually go through this? First off, we talk about them. We would do it at all hands meetings and team meetings, and we filtered this through to the entire organization. In fact, I would challenge you that if you meet anybody inside the organization and ask them about the core attributes, they would be able to walk through and explain to you what the core attributes are and why each one of them is important to our organization. Now, rather than just telling people these were the core attributes, what we did was the initial list, and there's been some tweaking to it, we published that and then invited people to come in as part of group sessions and come up with ideas on, did they like that particular core attribute? But more importantly, think about that core attribute and how we should live it. How we should, as an organization and as individuals, live that core attribute. Passion, unlocking individual potential, lead by example. We collected up that list, and we actually got then volunteers from the rank and file within the organization to help brainstorm and pull together a set of recommendations to the executive team about how we can live it. So it isn't just about big and bold and those types of things, but actually how do we live them? How do we do them? What would be things? What would be proof points that we could go off and do? As part of that exercise, we also created an assessment to allow the team to assess themselves. Could I, as an individual, live to these core attributes? And how am I living to these core attributes? We did it as a peer. So people at the same level got assessed by their peers around those core attributes. And we did it as a team globally. It was a real eye-opener for everybody in the organization, where people recognized that they were already living a number of these core attributes, and there were some core attributes that they, maybe wasn't a negative that they weren't doing them, they just hadn't really applied and really thought about them. And out of that, we got an extreme positive feedback response around those assessments, which allowed people then to think about what are the things they were going to do personally over the next 6 to 9 months to really live out these core attributes. The other thing we've done is we've changed our hiring process. New recruits that are being considered to come into the organization get assessed against the core attributes. If there's not a match, it makes no sense to bring somebody into the organization. We've set the core attributes, and everybody in the organization is aligned on this. And in fact, this was really driven by hiring managers using the core attributes really as that filter screen to make sure that people coming into our organization aligned with the culture of what it is we were trying to build here. The result is that the new hires that we recently brought into the organization who have been assessed against these core attributes have hit the ground running and have had huge impact into the organization. The other thing we've done is we've included core attributes into our performance management. At the end of the year, employees are getting assessed as to the set of those core attributes as to do they never exhibit them, do they sometimes exhibit them, or do they always exhibit them? And we're going to pick and roll around and change which core attributes we're going to measure each year based on what are the things that we're working on. Now, the assumption is that we're living all the core attributes every year, all the time, but we will pick and choose ones each year that we want to particularly emphasize on. So this year, there's 4 or 5 that we've chosen that will become part of that performance management. Now, coming up, I've been in this new role for a year. We started this whole process on core attributes 9 months ago. And what I can tell you is that the impact on the organization, the impact on the morale from the standpoint of people feeling like that they're contributing and they understand the organization and why we do things a certain way has just been beyond any set of expectations I could have had. The impact on the organization is, like I said, beyond anything that I had expected. But the fact of the matter is it's not a situation where we've documented them, we've run through this process, we now have a hiring process in place, it's part of people's annual performance and bonus calculations, and we're done. This is never ending. In fact, a group of employees have come forward and talked about adding one more core attribute. And there's a discussion that's going on. It's not being driven by the senior executives, albeit we own it, but we want these core attributes to be owned by everybody. So fact is that you've got to be open to that. It's not static, and it's a never-ending process. That includes things like rewarding teams when they show a core attribute, when somebody's done something big and bold or showed off, exceptional teamwork. Someone from Team A stepped over and helped Team B to do something that just had big impact. Likewise, and this is the tough part of the conversation, if you have people in your organization who are not living up to the core attributes, then you need to take that uncomfortable process of having the conversation with them. And if it's not going to work out, no foul, but work them out of the organization. If you let people stay within your organization who are not aligned with the core attributes, then the rest of the organization will start believing that the core attributes are not that important and not everybody's getting measured up against them. So, obviously, we all like the positive impact from these activities, but the fact is, in some cases, you got to deal with the difficult ones. And that includes getting rid of people who are not aligned with the core attributes. So what's our next steps? Where are we in this whole process? The next step is we're going through a process of validating how well we're doing on the recruiting and hiring to the culture. How well are we doing at using the core attributes to make sure that we're bringing in the best candidates in the hiring process? Second, we're in the early stages of creating a new onboarding process. We want to make sure that any new hire coming in truly understands the culture, truly understands the role of an innovation culture and our core attributes to the success of the organization. And then last but not least is we're going to review and adjust based on how well we're doing. I mean, the ultimate objective of setting the core attributes is to create a culture that encourages innovation. The real measure is the quality and the impact of the innovations we create. So we need to take a step back and see, have we created a set of core attributes that has allowed us to establish a culture of innovation, that has allowed us to deliver innovations that have the impacts that we need to have. And again, as I've said, it's a never-ending process. As I said earlier also, the impact from this activity over the last 9 months has been unbelievable. I could never have anticipated the impact and the upside that it has generated by really spending the time. From about September through January, the senior executive team spent probably 70% of our time focused on the core attributes and the culture of the organization. And it was a significant amount of time amongst the rest of the organization thinking about it and contemplating it and getting their input and participating in discussions. But in my past, I've been part of organizations where the senior leadership spent no time thinking about culture and core attributes, and it showed in the success of the organization. Versus my time at HP, where Bill and Dave spent a lot of time in the early years of HP to build a culture, to build a set of core attributes that defined what HP meant. And I wanted to bring that forward into the new organization that I'm now leading. And I can tell you that the support that I've gotten from the team, the support from the board of directors, and the success that we've had at really building a culture that is going to encourage, that is having impact already on the work that we do is beyond anything that I could have expected. And therefore, it just makes me more of an advocate that organizations, whether you're a startup or if you're already an established organization, if you're in a leadership position, take the time, create the culture. If you're in a large organization, focus on the culture of your team. Get the culture of your team right. The rest of the organization will take notice, and you can have impact. So, what do you think? Does it sound like a just absolute crazy thing that I've been doing the last 9 months? Could you translate it to your organization? But here's the question I really want to ask you, and I want to hear back from you on this is, what would you do to improve the process? I've laid it out. It's somewhat of a sufficient detail, but I didn't get into all the minutia. But standing where you are, listening to me describe it, what would you do to improve the process? If you're going to take this and apply it to your organization, or you're going to advise somebody else, or give me advice on how to improve it as I continue to roll this out throughout the organization and keep the process going, what would you do to improve the process? So drop me a note at feedback@philmckinney.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Stay tuned. More podcasts to come. Bye-bye.